Episode 11 Tears of Life. A colorful canvas depicting an inverted triangle was located in the very center of the temple and seemed to shine from within. This was attributed to the bright sunlight that penetrated through the panoramic windows on the right and left. Or maybe it was due to the special colors. It felt like God himself had been leading the artist's hand, directing the subtlest flickering energy into the brush. The students gathered around the painting, staring at it in fascination. It was evident from their faces that it made a strong impression and aroused emotions, but along with emotions it aroused a lot of questions. The students knew that this canvas was an example of objective art, where every detail was important, where there was nothing accidental. Here, even the smallest fragments of the image had their own symbolic meaning, and together they combined into a deep meaning. Almost the entire central part of the picture was occupied by a triangle, the top of which pointed down. It was divided into 4 tiers. The lowest of them, the pointed top, rested on the ground. Inside this part of the triangle was a man, naked, defenseless, emaciated, and suffering. He was painfully thin and lay on the damp ground, protecting himself from an invisible threat with his hand. There were shabby walls in the dungeon. Chains hung in the corner, and rats scurried at the feet of the unfortunate man. On the second tier, a much more beautiful room of an ancient castle was depicted. On the third, a hall in a luxurious palace, and on the fourth, a magnificent, heavenly garden under the open sky. Above this garden, with his arms outstretched to the sides, was the Lord God himself. He looked at the earth with absolute love, giving the inhabitants of the Garden of Eden his grace, and his white clothes sparkled with light. When the keeper of the knowledge approached the group of students, he looked at them with the same kindness and unconditional acceptance. Everyone turned to the sage. The eyes of men and women shone with joy, as if at that moment God himself touched their souls. The students were looking forward to an interesting conversation and hoped to receive detailed explanations. "Beloved teacher, we have seen a new painting," said a tall blonde girl, taking a step toward the sage and pointing at the canvas with her eyes. "Please explain what this image means. There are 4 tiers here, with a suffering person at the bottom. How should we understand this correctly?" The keeper looked at the canvas and smoothly stretched out his palm in its direction. "It shows a place where a person lives," he began to explain, "and it also shows where he can live. Look, we can live in such a beautiful place." He pointed to the 3rd tier of the triangle. "Or we can live in the Garden of Eden, where God is very close to us." "But then why is a man depicted in a terrible basement next to these disgusting rats?" the student asked, examining the lower tier of the painting. "Our upbringing put us there," the keeper replied. "Do you see how a man lies and writhes in pain? He is in prison suffering. He feels bad, scared, uncomfortable there, and he does not even suspect that there are 3 more floors above in which he could live. Many people will never know about it. They suffer like this all their lives in this basement, and then they go down into the tomb. But if a person knows the secret, that there are 3 more floors above, then he should look for the keys to them." The keeper of the knowledge shifted his gaze from the painting to the students in order to better understand their reaction to the explanations. there was a thirst for the knowledge in the eyes of each of them, which spoke of intense inner work. People tried to delve into the very essence, to understand, as deeply and fully as possible, what the sage was talking about. "Beloved teacher, what are these floors?" a middle-aged man with deep brown eyes and pronounced cheekbones asked. "I understand correctly that there are no random details in objective art, so each floor is—" He paused, carefully choosing his words. "A certain level of spiritual development of a person?" The teacher nodded, confirming the man's guess. "You understand correctly, Ruslan," he said, giving the student a look of support and approval. "And each floor has its own meaning. The second floor of the triangle, which is located right above our basement, is awareness. If a person can reach it, he is already moving into a better world, a better life, a better being. Look at the image." The teacher pointed to the picture. On the second tier, a person is moving into a beautiful room of an ancient castle and can live here in a completely different way. "Thank you for the explanations," Ruslan thanked the sage, and again fixed his gaze on the canvas. "Now it becomes clearer to me what was meant here. But if the first tier is awareness, then what is higher?" The question interested all the students, which was clear from how attentively they listened to the teacher, afraid to miss even one word. "The next floor is sublime emotions," the sage explained, pointing to the third tier. "A real palace is depicted here. If a person experiences high emotions, he lives much better. Life becomes happier, more complete and meaningful. It turns out that we first have to go through awareness, and only then can we awaken sublime emotions in ourselves," the blonde girl decided to clarify, addressing the sage. "That is right, Angelina," he confirmed. "While a person is not aware, it is difficult to rise further, and sublime emotions can be awakened only in fragments, in snatches. The person experienced sublime emotions and then fell asleep again, and fell into the same state, again fell into the basement." The teacher pointed to the lower tier in the picture, into his own negative emotions, and there he began to suffer terribly. Angelina nodded, indicating that she understood the explanation. "So our main enemy is unawareness?" "Many of the students have already been on the fourth floor for some time," the sage replied. "It is very good there, but it is very difficult to stay there for a long time, without awareness. They emerge a little bit, then back, emerge again, and then go back. But if awareness was stable, then they would have already stayed on the second floor." At that moment, another student stepped forward, a bright green-eyed brunette. "Great sage," she began. "You said that our upbringing placed us on the lower tier. What did you mean?" The woman looked expectantly at the sage. "We were taught to live in the basement from childhood," he began to explain, "by relatives, parents, teachers, friends, and TV. And we are used to living like this, acting according to patterns, playing roles that we do not like, following false attitudes. We do not even understand that it is possible to live in any other way. We are not thinking about the fact that there is something else besides this basement, but about how to get settled here, where to lay hay, where to put stone on stone, where to make a table, and so on. We are trying to somehow settle down in the basement instead of moving to higher floors, where we can live well and develop." The sage looked around at the students, and with an eloquent gesture pointed to the picture, to where the three upper tiers of life were. "But how can we see it?" Angelina asked. How should a person understand that he is in the basement? If there was no teacher, how would we know? Yes, no one would have known without a teacher, the keeper of the knowledge answered, and meeting the student's gaze, read the poetic lines. Convince with faith, bright and refreshing, the teacher preaches affably. To life so gray and so depressing, he will give meaning manfully. His words sounded solemn, yet at the same time with amazing warmth and care for his students, for everyone who heard him, and was actively trying to move to higher levels. And when we have already seen that there are more floors above, how can we get out? One of the students asked, a tall man with an attentive look. It is necessary to strive for this and intend, the sage explained, to want it very much. If a person does not strive, if he does not want much, then he will live in the basement all his life. He paused, and an elusive sadness flashed in his gaze. The way, for example, one of my students, Sergei, lives his life. I have repeatedly explained everything to him, tried to get him out of this basement, but he did not heed nor believe me. He listened to his relatives because they know how to live in this basement, because they have spent their whole lives in it. And he, too, began to equip the basement, began to lay hay, put stone on stone. And what, does he still live and suffer like this? Rustlin asked quietly. Yes, the teacher confirmed, not condemning, but rather regretting that his student never took a step toward getting out of his prison. While he believes that the oligarchs are to blame for his bad life, that the government should provide him with a decent existence. The sage paused for a few seconds, and again he looked thoughtfully at the canvas. But no government will provide us with a decent existence. It is all in our hands. We ourselves must move to higher floors of our lives. Then we will feel good. The government can only help to settle down in the basement, so it is useless to expect anything from it. Teacher, you said that the first floor is awareness, the second floor is sublime emotions, but what is on the third floor? A thin, dark-haired woman asked, continuing to examine the painting. The teacher did not immediately begin to answer, giving her and the others the opportunity to think about the answer on their own. Shaking her head doubtfully, the woman suggested, "Is this a paradise where a person goes after death?" "This is very similar to paradise," the keeper of the knowledge smiled. "Look, an open-air garden, beautiful peacocks and swans, fountains and gazebos, peace and goodness. But all this is available to man here on earth. But how can we get here? God is depicted up here." The teacher pointed to a figure in white shining robes. "When we establish contact with the divine, we find the higher self in ourselves and ignite the spark of God in our soul. And then we move to the top floor, after which a truly happy life begins in the Garden of Eden." The sage looked at the disciple, shifted his gaze to the others, and continued after a short pause. "We must remember that there is a part of God in each of us, and think about how we can move to the next floors." Teacher, you first said that we should find the right keys to each floor. By keys you mean spiritual practices, right? Rustlin asked, looking carefully at the master. "Yes," he confirmed, "the keys are spiritual practices. Doing them is very important, because it helps to move from the basement of the mind to awareness. When you reach awareness, you need to do practices to awaken sublime emotions. And then it is already possible to move gradually to the next floor, and there will already be an opportunity to absorb the divine. Therefore, we must always remember what floors we have and what opportunities we have. The secret is already open to all of you. Thank you, teacher. May I ask another question? The man spoke. The keeper of the knowledge looked at him approvingly, and then he continued. Can these floors be considered as our centers, mechanical, emotional, and intellectual? And is the fourth floor the higher centers? Yes, Ruslan, you did well. You have seen the connection very accurately. The sage praised the disciple. The basement is the mechanical parts of the centers of our body. The second tier is the intellectual parts of the centers, that is, awareness. The third floor is the highest emotional center. And the fourth floor, where we see the Garden of Eden under the open sky, is the highest intellectual center. This is our soul, our spirit, in which there is a part of God. The teacher finished speaking, and once again turned his gaze to the students. They looked at him, at the picture in a calm contemplative reverie, illuminated by the light of the joy of knowledge. And suddenly the sage spoke again, and in the silence that reigned, his voice sounded in a special, inspired way. There was an inspiring energy and strength in him that they wanted to touch, absorbing its harmony. There is a sparkling on the wave, across a sea gray and foamy, to gently follow by a stave, delight and misery to show me. I watch a flower in the fade, oh yes, embodiment of solar. It used to live but couldn't wade, a feel of routes in earthly shade, as lighted whole and even wholer. He rose upward to heaven with a dream, to viewing stars in their pattern. No image true, the ego stream, is shine to light abyss for certain. I sauntered in from there high, and wished to back return from here. But up and down's a sheer by, for things are all whatever near. I grew in seeing the divine, within a gold on high and higher. And was it all a sunny shine, for life and breath and mental fire? And formerly, from other time, before my obvious existence, received I God's blessed rhyme, as on his mercy and assistance. There is a sparkling on the wave, across a sea gray and foamy. And came the verity and gave the grief and cheer to bestow upon me. The image of God on the canvas now seemed especially vivid and tangible to the students, as if he was not just painted on it, but really looked at them from the canvas now, with absolute love and acceptance. We invite you to join spiritual seminars, workshops, and retreats hosted by the Leader Masters. Reveal your superpowers, find your predestination, and accumulate power to gain well-being and bring your goals to life. Send an email saying, "I want to join the seminar" to our mailbox, and we will give you all the information. See you soon.